First, I'd like to thank everyone and welcome you all to the inaugural ZEDEDA Transform Conference. It's amazing to have this stellar panel here, and we thank you so much for your participation. Welcome to our audience as well. My name is Lisa. I'll be your chaperone for the day for this session. I will not be visible after I finish talking. I will be in the waiting room, but I can see you, I can hear you, and I can see the chat. So if you need anything, please just send me a quick chat. Everyone in the audience, on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see the chat window. Please put your questions, comments, if you want to put in anything there. We will see it, and we will address questions throughout the session and probably leave a little bit of time at the end as well. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to our moderator, Evan Kirstel of Avira. And I'll let you all take it from here.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. Honored to be here. And what a stellar cast of characters you put together today and this session in particular, which is, of course, the most interesting and exciting session of the day. So hope everyone stays attuned. Absolutely. So I like to start by going around the table, and we'll do some introductions sort of clockwise. Gunit from Relayer.io. If you could start, introduce yourself, a little bit about Relayer, and why are you here? What's your interest in this forum in general and the industry in particular?
You got it. No, absolutely. Thank you so much. So Gunit Bedi, I'm the Chief Revenue Officer, basically the commercial operations for Relayer, which is, we're a fully owned subsidiary of an insurance company, or the largest insurance company in the world, Munich Re, which is interesting. Before that, we were a venture-backed startup with an IoT platform and an AI solution. And we're German roots, so a lot of focus in the mid-market, heavy industrial world. And what we've been doing is on really trying to transform the industrial world from CapEx to OpEx with insurance, finance, and technology. So we're kind of getting the whole outcome world together and an insurance world together with technology. And very interested in this topic because, that's kind of some of our bread and butter for the last 7 years has been how companies do not sell very heavy CapEx or capital equipment, but sell them as a service. And, as the whole world is moving into equipment as a service or servitization, and I think 5G and the edge really accelerates that. We have a big 75 people center of excellence in Poland, of all places. And that's where, Katowice is where our edge team sits. A lot of ex-Motorola, and we really love the space. So look forward to chatting with you, Evan, and the panelists.
Thanks. And you're in sunny Austin, Texas.
I am.
Home of the best barbecue in the country. So how is it hot yet there? Is it warm enough for you in Austin?
It is hot. 106 yesterday. Today is not that bad. For Phil, normal temperature is 42. But yeah, it's been hot.
It's hot.
Awesome. Well, great having you here. Phil Marshall. Phil, and I hope I have your company's name pronounced right. Is it Topio Networks?
That's right. So I wear two hats. Topio Networks, where I head up the research, and also Toliga Research. Both companies, what we're doing is applying AI to industry research. And so it's something I've been involved in at least for the last 10 years, using system dynamics and natural language processing to try and bring industry research into the modern age, if you like, and apply some of the technologies available there. I've been involved in and around industry research for a little over 20 years, and involved primarily in mobile technologies. So I started out in the telecom industry deploying 1G, so analog, and I sort of
followed the way through Phil.
The technologies, unfortunately, yeah. And then more recently, it's sort of the combination of, and particularly with Topio, the combination of mobile, so 5G technologies, as well as particularly the impact of edge computing has sort of really been the focus of the research work that I've been involved in.
And you're in the beautiful country of New Zealand, where I think many of us here wish we were right now for the foreseeable future. How are things down under?
Well, I can tell you about tomorrow because we're a day ahead, but no, things are good. Things are good here. I was based for a long time in Boston, So it's a little bit of a relief to be down here at the moment. So it's a little bit fortuitous that I'm in New Zealand, but things are good. We're in lockdown, but they're being pretty strict in terms of trying to manage things from the COVID perspective.
I bet. Well, thanks for that. Steve Mullaney, Principal and CEO at Aviatrix. I think you're in sunny Tahoe at the moment.
Smoky Tahoe.
So, Smoky Tahoe.
Yeah.
Steve, share some background on you and your company, if you would.
Yeah, so Steve Mullaney, CEO of Aviatrix. I'm actually also a board member of ZEDEDA. So I've known Saeed for a couple of years, so I've been helping them out. So super excited about kind of edge computing. And Aviatrix is a cloud networking company. I mean, the best way to think of us is if you think about 1992 and the movement from SNA to client server, Cisco became that architectural, reference design that people use for networking and network security. Aviatrix is going to be basically the same, but for cloud. And I think the name of this whole conference of Transform is a perfect name, and that's why I'm here, because this is a transformation of the computing model from client server to cloud, and in its entirety. So there's a huge, probably the biggest wave of value creation and innovation that I've seen in my entire 35 years of IT, and probably ever will see ever again, because I'll be dead by the next time there's a wave that's built.
Well, that's a positive note, uplifting note, and we'll get back to you on that. But thanks for that. We'll come back to you with some questions. Next, we have Antonio Pellegrino, who has the best name of anyone I've ever met, with Mutable. .io. Pele, what does Mutable do, and what brings you here?
Yeah, so Mutable, you can think of it like an Airbnb for servers, right? So we're basically doing what Amazon did to create AWS, taking all the extra resources that all these companies have that are just sitting there nascent, and essentially creating a public cloud edge on top of all of this. So that way a developer who wants to get resources that are closest to anyone, to their customers or whatever it may be, can improve on latency, bandwidth, and security by getting access to the most closest compute available on the public side. So we're kind of putting it all together to make like a federated cloud.
That is timely. Wow, great mission. So let's go back and start with Guneet. Digital transformation might be one of the most overused buzzwords of the pandemic, but it is real what's happening in terms of transformation at the individual level, the organizational level. Give us some practical insights into what's happening beyond the buzzwords. What are real customers, real CXOs, CIOs doing or having to do to transform their business given the current circumstance, let's say?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's a great question. I think, we come across two styles of CXOs. I think, as I said, we have a lot of business in Central Europe and the US. We come across a couple of CXOs who are actually very concerned, right? We did a recent survey with a couple hundred CXOs, and of course they're concerned with the pandemic. They're concerned with the resilience of the business because they have nice, lumpy, large sales in the industrial world, and then they worry about when they can go back and sell the next big asset. So there's one camp which is very worried, and I'll come back to them, and there's the other camp which is doing really well, with the transformation which has happened just in industrial world, and things coming back. But they are also concerned because the competitive lines are blurring, right? So a very common example I use is a company which does they make faucets, think of them as they call Grohe, which is the Kohler of Germany, and they make faucets and sinks, and they think of Google and Amazon as the biggest competitor, and kind of blows us away first of all. But we're like, that kind of makes sense because they got the home security space pretty well. The next big issue with homes and commercial real estate is water damage, right? There's close to 25 billion a year which insurance companies pay on water damage, right? And hopefully none of you have had water damage, but if you had, it's really painful in your house. So I think CXOs are really starting to think about all of this technology, which people have been talking for 6-7 years now. Seems like a lot of this is real, but how do they use it for the business benefit? We don't see enough, or we've seen enough CXOs 3 years or so ago, almost last year, pilot stuff, and that people are done with piloting, right? And they're like, how do I use this to really impact my business? Be it new revenue streams, be it protecting my business in times like COVID. I'll start with an example and love to get everybody else's thoughts. One of our customers is essential workers, and they basically do docking doors and warehouse docking doors in Walmarts of the world, right? And as you know, that's a super growing business for everywhere in the world, with e-commerce and everything else coming in. And they wish every door was connected and every docking leveler was actually smart, so we could predict failure before it happened and we could guarantee it, right? So there's I think a lot of companies, be it in the sad camp or the happy camp, are really looking for business more than technology impacting business more than anything else. I'd love to get
that's really helpful. I'd love to get back to some of those themes. Phil, what about you? Beyond the analyst hat that you wear, what are some practical stories around transformation that you could share with the audience here?
Yeah, for sure. So in terms of in terms of the companies, COVID has certainly accelerated activity. But there's a lot of companies with sort of weak balance sheets, so it's a matter of real prioritization. One interesting thing we've seen actually is an area I've been focused on recently is automotive and automotive manufacturing. And what you see there is you've got companies that are really struggling from a market standpoint, but at the same time being disrupted by the likes of Tesla and others to transform. And actually in 2020, what we've seen is a shift where they've said actually we see more demand for electrification than autonomous. So you sort of see these shifts in priorities that are occurring. And the reason behind that is because of COVID has sort of illustrated the impact of reduced pollution. So people are sort of starting to say, actually electrification is something that we want to focus more on than autonomous. So what you're starting to see with these companies, and that sort of illustrates the point that on the one hand, you've got this accelerated interest or increased interest in transformation. On the other hand, you've got companies with, a lot of companies with who are challenged from a balance sheet standpoint to make significant capital investment. So they've got to prioritize. And I think to Ganeet's point, there is a sense of urgency that you're starting to see because they recognize that if they don't respond and they don't do it right, firstly, they may spend money in the wrong places, and secondly, they may be left behind because there's increased awareness in terms of this digital transformation process.
That's a great insight there. Steve, what about you and your customers? Are they more demanding now? Are they looking for specific returns, value add, ROI? Like, have things become more urgent?
For sure. I think we're all on this panel, I'm sure seeing the same thing, that COVID is an absolute accelerant to the cloud, right? So if you think about, I call it the Cambrian explosion to cloud, happened about a year and a half ago, where every enterprise said, now I really mean it. I'm moving into the cloud, and that's going to become my center of architecture, my architectural, center of excellence. And so I think COVID hit. Everything else, it's just an accelerant, and a lot of people you see Cisco with horrible earnings, stock down 10%. They're not the first one, they're not the last. Why? Because it's not coronavirus, it's cloud virus, right? And if you have pre-existing conditions like you're focused on on-prem and selling boxes and things like that, you are in trouble from cloud virus. It's going to be fatal. And I think a lot of companies, Phil, you mentioned Tesla. I think that's a great example. The reason this digital transformation is so real, and it's not just a buzzword, is people have serious existential threats to their survival. Go ask GM, Ford, every other auto manufacturer what they think about Tesla now, right? And I'm on the board of a company that's selling stuff to auto, and guess what? They ignored it. They thought it was just Elon Musk, and you know the EV is still only 1% of the market, and internal combustion engines are going to be around forever. And I kept telling them, okay, watch. Now I didn't predict it with COVID, but COVID just accelerates that, and exactly what you said. Everybody is now 100% focused on electrification, and so Tesla is going to do to the autos what Uber did to taxis. I mean, and that is playing out in every single vertical. And then even for what we're doing here, edge computing, same thing. It's going to be an accelerant for that. Why? I don't want to put humans out there. I'm going to automate. I want to simplify. I want everything to look like cloud. It can't be OT out at these, you know, remote regions, right? Everything needs to look like a cloud VPC with the simplicity and the automation and the agility that comes along with it. So it's across the board. I mean, every single industry is looking at this, and that's why it's not a bottoms up, the technology people saying we're going to make this change. It's the CEO and the board forcing this and saying we are now doing this. That's the biggest change I've seen in the last year and a half, and only exactly with COVID.
Wow, that's exciting. Mind blown. Pele, Antonio, you have a very practical solution for developers and cloud architects. How are they using, you know, your solution in the current environment?
Well, actually, I think this dovetails into what we were just talking about even more so, because essentially what's going on in the cable and telco world is that exact thing. When we talk about 5G, we talk about cable LAN, they call it 10G. The whole premise is actually around digital transformation. That's really the underlying thing behind 5G and that move. It's not the actual speed or anything like that. It's about the change in how the infrastructure is moved to software versus being black boxes. And that change has enabled things like edge computing to exist, because everything used to be licensed from Nokia or Ericsson and be in a centralized location. And that's just how it worked with 3G. And now all of that has been changed. And the premise of that is now cable and telco companies used to be getting black boxes from Cisco, from Aris, from all these companies. And now they're getting commodity off the shelf, Dell, HP, so on and so forth, servers. And that's the norm. And at that point, you can run anything on it, right? Doesn't matter if it's a RAN or EPC or a video distribution or application that's going to help with gaming or help with other things or e-commerce. And that's really where we would come in, right? The fact that we can take all this infrastructure that has to go out there anyway because of this digital transformation at the extreme edges, not just in a centralized cloud, and then take that and convert it into a place where now the normal developer can just as easily as going on AWS, pressing a few buttons and having something deployed, now have that across all of these industries in the closest, within 30 miles of their customers, right? It's a totally different change.
Yeah, fantastic. And 5G and IoT and Edge, again, have been all the rage in marketing land for the last months, years. But I'm literally on a 4G LTE connection. I'll soon have a 5G device. So Gunit, I mean, beyond the obvious benefits to me as an end user, what are enterprises looking at in terms of leveraging Edge and 5G and other wireless technologies? What are the kind of use cases they're looking at deploying, this year, not 2-3 years in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, lots of really good points by Steve and Phil also talking about, the Teslas of the world. But, what I see, and a little controversial, Steve and Phil, but, what I see is where people are actually more concerned is smaller organizations, right? Because when I say smaller organizations, the $1 billion, $100 million to $1 billion, in that range, where fundamentally their business will get so affected with cloud and technology and everything else. It cannot be a people-dependent business where a lot of these people have differentiated. It cannot be a product-differentiated business because, just taking an example of, let's say, a steel cutter or a CNC machine, for the last 20, 30 years, a lot of people have differentiated with product difference, if you may. It's kind of going away, right? And the world's becoming closer. So no longer does, one company in Germany lead the German market, whereas, Americans, a Midwest company leads all of the industrial world in the US. So there's, from our perspective, the differentiation is really coming in the services world, right? And there's no surprise that 80% or more of the money spent is on the O&M, or the operation and maintenance of the equipment, right? Versus doesn't matter what the equipment is, spent 11 years at Cisco, be it from the Cisco router all the way to a heavy industrial machine. Automotive is a great example. We have a big automotive space. My prime example is heat treatment. So if you think of it, it just seems so basic. But, the way you treat the roof of an automotive, be it Tesla or be it anything else, versus the front of the car is very different, right? And, now that their markets are being disrupted, they don't want to buy $1 million equipment just to treat aluminum. So one of our customers is actually doing heat treatment as a service. And their biggest innovation was a micro factory, literally in a shipping container. But the second big, of course, the first three they shipped was one in Mexico, one in Dublin, one in the middle of Germany. So how do you manage these and make money on an ongoing basis? And they're actually doing this as a service where they purely do heat treatment for the tons of aluminum that they treat, right? So I think what we're seeing, Evan and team, is a lot of services innovation, and innovation which can go beyond geographical boundaries and without the dependency of people, which is where a lot of the automation is coming in, where people are differentiating. And of course, hopefully that leads to a lot more of, subscription economy. By the way, the last thing you cancel on subscription, last example is your basic bills, which are recurring. So if they have a similar business, then they can strive through pandemics or macroeconomic issues a lot more. So that's what we're seeing. So some really, interesting trends happening, and it's really accelerated the last 3 to 4 months. We have 3x more inquiries, just FYI, than last year. Not 3x more business, I wish that was true, but we at least have 3x more inquiries where people are really thinking about what to do, right?
Yeah, and they're thinking about how to innovate and not just survive, but really differentiate themselves in this difficult time. So Phil, I've seen more innovation in the last months in certain areas than in years. What about you on the edge and 5G in particular? What opportunities have you seen emerge in the last 4 months, for example?
Right. I mean, the first thing I'd say, which I find is interesting, so on the one hand, you take a company like, just going back to some of the previous points, you have a company like Tesla, which is told, and Amazon for that matter, that have taught us that vertical integration when you're trying to innovate fast is important. And then you have, as Ganeet was talking about, some of the smaller companies who just can't afford some of these technologies and have to rely on services. So there's this, and Antonio was talking about sort of black box architectures where you lay software on top of it. You have this conflict, I think, in terms of innovation between where do you need to vertically integrate, where do you rely on services, where can you use commodity orientated infrastructure. And I think that's sort of an interesting dynamic that plays out in this space and sort of comes back to those previous points. From the standpoint of 5G, it's still early. I do think, actually in our natural language processing, we project hype cycles. So we model it based on online content to figure out where is 5G on the hype cycle, and it's definitely well up that cycle. You're not even deploying technologies today that are capable of delivering the types of services that are being promoted, because it's really just an extension of 4G. It's the radio. They're not doing a standalone architecture. It's just starting to happen now. So on the one hand, from a technology standpoint, we're not quite there yet, but we're coming fast. Secondly, radio spectrum I see as being a sort of a key consideration, because it is the lock-in that service providers have traditionally had over mobile services. And so, how does that play out, given that service providers, at least on a retail side, are very they're very good at, and their businesses essentially optimize for selling a narrow set of mass market consumer orientated services. So what happens when you try and bring that in an enterprise environment? And I think that's what starts to create some of these opportunities around managed services, right? With what I think of as almost like a new category of MVNO that will start to deal with industrial, that will start to deal with commercial, retail, and so forth, in the sense that you need some player who can act as a mediator between the two. And in essence, I see the telco actually benefiting most from perhaps more of a wholesale play in terms of selling services. In the same way today, their biggest wholesale customers on the fixed side are the cloud service providers and the over-the-top players. And I sort of see a similar sort of thing emerging with 5G. But it definitely is early days, and we run the risk of 5G being an apparent failure because it just doesn't live up to all of the expectations given where we are today.
Great points. So, Steve, when it comes to innovation, you're obviously on the cutting edge of cloud and multi-cloud and edge computing, and you're also, swimming among sharks like Amazon and Google Cloud and Azure. How do you innovate around some of these tech giants and differentiate your offering in quite a fascinating landscape like edge?
Yeah, so I think what happens is all the cloud providers, by definition, give basic level services, right? Because they have to do things across many, many regions across all over the world. And so they have to do everything at scale. So by definition, what they want to deliver to enterprises is the basic level services, because at the end of the day, they need to make money. And if they delivered high level services to every customer, they would never make any money. So their whole thing is to deliver, some subset of the basic services that everyone needs, and then partner with people like Aviatrix to deliver the advanced set of networking and network security services. And then we charge on top of that. If they had to deliver that level for everyone, and if only 10% of the people use that functionality or 20%, they would lose money. So by definition, they can't do that. I'd say the other thing that happens is a couple things that, like I talked about the year and a half ago, that Cambrian explosion to cloud, where now it moves from, simplicity to these complex, organisms, if you would, of moving into the cloud. Enterprises have now said that is the center of gravity. When they now do that, they're all starting, or at least the innovative ones, are starting to actually look at, why do I even have MPLS at all? Why don't I just leverage the tens of billions of dollars that's put into these high performance, low latency backbones that AWS, Azure, Google have put together? I mean, it's unbelievable what these people have done. And I'm building a private network or even an MPLS network from a carrier. These hyperscalers are the carriers of the future, right? And so what I see happening is they look at that, and then, oh, by the way, where we come in also is providing the traffic engineering to enable them based on latencies and route parameters and things like that to pick which hyperscaler they're going to want to use for their backbone. And then 5G, I mean, if you're paying attention, Microsoft just made a couple of acquisitions. Meta also on the board of, and Affirm Networks. Guess what? Both of them are 5G companies. What's going on? Guess what? Microsoft's not stupid. They look and they see 5G is going to be the on-ramp into their backbone. So, when you look at where the architecture of the infrastructure is going, that's absolutely where it's going. And that's where the innovation is. And so, Aviatrix is just think of us as a control plane on top of that, controlling the routing and the networking and the network security on top of that. Really multi-cloud, which includes what you have on-prem world.
Wow, what an exciting place to be. You're sort of perched on overlooking this whole landscape. That's fantastic.
I need to integrate the edge into my my core network in the hyperscalers as well.
So Pele, what about you? What are you seeing customers in terms of edge adoption and even leveraging 5G direct to the enterprise, let's say?
Yeah, so the way I think about edge computing in 5G is really wrapped around about three pillars. One is latency, and that is not just lower latency, but also consistent latency. And that has to do with bring the packets on a control plane as soon as possible, like Steve is saying, and being able to route it where it needs to go in a way that's as most manageable as possible. And that goes everything from gaming to, business delivery of video and so on and so forth. But then you also have high bandwidth applications. And high bandwidth is also about reducing the amount of backhaul that's required for the cable and telco companies to operate. So if you move things closer to the edge, you can do a 100 megabit upload, or be able to do a crazy amount of downloads for game updates or application updates and so on and so forth without destroying networks like they're doing today. It's basically like an external DDoS every time that there's a Mac OS update or a new game patch. And then on the last side of it, it's also about security, right? And so the security is very interesting because, as mentioned all over here many times, it's actually about how do we reduce on-premise. And by reducing on-premise, you still want to have that level of security to some degree. And with all these players in both the telco, cable, and cloud land providing SD-WAN, which is software-defined networks on top of everything to connect all of their, like a firewall more or less on a cloud level or inside the operator level versus being inside of the retailer or manufacturer shop. It allows you to have compute basically on-prem in an elastic fashion, but on the operators or on the colos nearby, and provide that same level of security that's you're getting on an on-prem kind of model. So those are the three pillars, and with that in mind, it's really about trying to drive the innovation of how do you get new vendors to come in. So far, most of the vendors, especially if you're talking about on-prem, there's such a large cost of having people next to a retail store for SLA reasons that it's very hard for anyone to break into that. It's an IBM, it's an SAP, it's all these kind of guys who have all these humans physically available to fix something within an hour or a day. Because just think of e-commerce. If you have these automated checkouts that people have today, right? You're able to just scan things yourself and do whatever. If those go out for a whole day, you're screwed as your business, right? You just lost everything. So those type of things now to not have it on the edge and increase IT spend and have it actually inside of these data centers that are nearby, that are owned by these cable telcos and edge compute coming about, allows you to have that flexibility and bring in these new style resources. And that's, I think, a huge transformation effort of reducing the overall IT spend and shifting it more into a cloud-like environment. And that might not actually be in a major data center in the middle of the US, but it will be a data center nonetheless nearby.
That's a great point, Pele. And I guess switching over to Guneet, how do you balance the need for speed and time to market and innovation against risk and the conservative nature of big companies and, big salary CIOs in general? Aren't these opposing forces who they want security and stability, but they want all this innovation and new services as well? What's that balancing act look like for you and your team?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. And I think I wouldn't say a lot of people have found the secret sauce, but it's an interesting entrepreneurship and external, entrepreneurship kind of battle, right? I was just typing on chat where we firmly believe that, the piranhas of the world will eat the sharks, right? The small fish come together and really are fast and nimble. And I think we see some of that, but it's not proven. Of course, Evan, I think one of this comes really to cultural incentives, like you rightly said. How do you set up an organization which is okay and celebrates failure? It's just not about wearing Nikes and jeans in a reinsurance world, for example, where everybody wears a suit and a tie every day to work. But actually, to really change the underlying mindset and culture and the incentives. We've been big fans of micro goals and how do you set up those wins to kind of, big transformations, because big transformations can be very scary. Of course, you see, by the way, big companies very successful too, right? I mean, when I joined Cisco, it was a box pusher, not anymore, right? Despite all the current challenges, a good 60% plus of their businesses services. If a Rolls-Royce can do it, a Cisco can do it, I think big companies can do it. But then there's, of course, enough examples of entrepreneurs and small companies doing it, which, someone like us who gets acquired by a big Munich giant, and we become the innovation arm now to kind of drive that behavior. I think the last point I'll leave there is, all of the importance of actually, having that mindset of thinking out of the box, and mindset of thinking of, big transformation, of course, comes with execution. Strong execution, and that's a big advantage that companies have, the larger companies, right, like the Teslas of the world. If they can get the execution right, it's like get out of the way, right? But you really need to get that right, which is the harder thing to do as an entrepreneur, right? You're a speedboat, but you don't know when your funding runs out, so you gotta make the right bets to get there.
Yeah, it's the classic challenge, Phil. How do you balance speed versus innovation, risk versus reward? What is that demarc? What is that balancing act like in our space these days, Phil?
Really hard. If you take, like Antonio was talking about, the different facets of 5G and edge, right? Low latency, data sovereignty and security, as well as you have sort of the bandwidth performance issues if you've got a large number of machines, or connections. So there's these different characteristics from the standpoint of companies we see today. They're very focused on the security and data sovereignty, right? Because they can kind of see, it's something we need. We can see it's tangible in terms of how it's delivered. Take that against something like latency. Now you're dealing with, well, what's the application layer doing? What's all this other functionality doing to achieve that, right? So there's these trade-offs that are really important. The other trade-off is there a first mover advantage, or are you better off being a fast follower, right? And that's a classic in this industry of how fast can you follow. With some of these massive infrastructure changes and fundamental changes in the way in which services are delivered, you sort of can't afford to be. But then if you're a big company, you can sort of buy up the smaller guys who've innovated and allowed you to, and will allow you to take advantage of those innovations. And then obviously from the standpoint of organizational structure, I mean, we've seen massive changes over the last decade or more in terms of the way in which technology and service innovation is managed. So I think all of those facets are really important, and there's really no one answer. But this digital transformation is an obvious trend that they've got to.
Yeah, well, speaking of that, Steve, I mean, you seem like an aggressive guy, an aggressive CEO. How far do you push on the bleeding edge of technology adoption, features, functionality, services? Do you look to be a fast mover and lead by example, or are you more cautious with some of these new capabilities that are emerging?
I know we're probably running out of time. That's why Lisa's sitting there.
Okay. I'm gonna keep talking.
Photobomb.
Keep talking.
Yeah. I guess I would just say that it's never technology that's the issue, right? What is the issue in terms of adoption? It's the damn human, right? People don't like their cheese moved, right? Entropy is the strongest force in the world. What's in motion stays in motion. They like doing the same thing. And so you have to rock them. You have to, move their cheese. And that happened a year and a half ago with cloud. And it happened from the CEO and it happened from the board. And that's why the enterprises weren't moving to the cloud, because it's the human. And so what we tend to do, and I think the successful companies are going to do, is it's about how do you bring along the human from the old world to the new, because they're scared, right? This is the cheese is moved. I don't know what to do. I'm 52 years old. I'm not going to get another job. I'm going to get fired if this doesn't work. F you, you're not bringing this crap into my company, right? I'm staying with the old shit, right? And so you got to bring them along. And I think what that is education, right? Learnings, and then they start learning, and then you bring them along that way, because just fire all their IT people, right? They may want to, but they can't. And so we've got to bring along these guys, that maybe have been in IT for 30 years, and they know COBOL, right? I got to bring them into this new world that we talk about, but you have to bring them along. And so I think that like any innovation, leaders see it, and then it's all about, okay, now how am I going to get the herd of people that work for me to go do that? And I think the only way to do that is you got to ease it for them. And that's through education and learning.
Yeah, that's a great point. The human characteristic, the human quality. Although on the flip side of that, we've seen automation and RPA and automated technologies have a huge boost through the pandemic, which is the ultimate irony, right? I mean, we're going to have more people displaced, out of work, what have you, and yet we're doing more with automation. So Pele, you seem like you have a pretty automated approach. How much does training and the skill set play into your solution when it comes to automating IT, you know, putting an easy button on top of Edge or 5G?
I think Steve got it right. This is not a technology problem. Technology has been advancing this kind of stuff in the cloud for how many years? It's a behavioral problem. It is a tree hugger server mentality problem of people not wanting to let go of things that they know that they can control and what they can more or less, right? What are they going to get yelled for, so on and so forth, if I want to pass on this responsibility or not. And if they do, they will buy those crazy SLAs to make sure they can pass the blame on to you, right? That's just the mentality of it. But for our perspective, it is 100% across the board about automation. Literally everything needs to be automated. Infrastructure, especially. There is no configs. There is no like, hey, look, one off here, one off there. Everything is put infrastructure into programming. So that way things can get spun up and spun down on demand. And if something breaks, it's respun up somewhere else and you don't even know that it happened.
You mean I don't need 18 DVDs anymore? Come on. This is terrible.
Right? So with this in mind, right, especially when we're talking about Edge, right, and making that a reality, you're not going to have hands-on in every single one of these locations. You're going to have people there 24/7. You're not going to have, these locations have the perfect power situation with automatic generators that are, redundant 3 times. You're not going to have the greatest cooling. All these things don't exist in these locations, but that's okay. If in software you can have the redundancy factor, if everything's commodity, meaning, generic white box servers, therefore you can have things spun up in another location that you might have that generator only run the fiber rack, right? Everything else, it just transfers the traffic to the nearby sister location or whatever, all the way up to the cloud, who cares? And automate that problem with redundancy that way than it is about physical box and physical mentality that has been trained to these people for the past how many years?
Great insight. So Lisa, you've had a busy day. Do you think our panel was the best of the day? Would that be your...
I'm telling you, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. Yeah.
Put you on the spot there. So how are we for time? Do we have time for questions?
We're at our time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any last minute questions from the audience? Anything have any more preferably loaded questions that we could use to promote ourselves or our solutions?
Yes, feel free. Shameless promoting. It's all good.
Yeah. So Ganeet, where should they go to learn more about you personally and the solutions that you're involved with?
Yeah. Thank you. Relayer.io, REL.io, or my LinkedIn, Ganeet Bedi. And the last thought I'll leave you is, if you're not doing it, somebody else is. So, your own biggest competitor in this world. Technology is not a problem, like Steve and Antonio said so well. It's, do it, get it done, right?
Yeah.
You have to have running shoes and get running.
Well, no, don't talk about running, because there's not going to be none of that here. But definitely follow me on Twitter. Here's my Twitter handle. I'd love to continue this after everyone hangs up. So feel free to tweet at me or this group, and we can carry on. Phil, any words of wisdom from New Zealand, or otherwise, how can folks reach you if they want to chat further?
Certainly on Twitter or LinkedIn, or also, Topio Networks, Toliga Research. So, but great to join the panel with you guys. It's been a good discussion, and I think we covered a lot of ground. So,
yeah, thanks,
you.
Steve, any last words of wisdom for the group, and how can they follow you and all your success at Aviatrix?
LinkedIn's a great platform for me, and then aviatrix.com for the company.
Great. Pele, how can I sign up? Do you take credit cards, or do I
Yep.
No, we signed for your soul.
Oh, okay. Well, my soul's I've already sold that, so there's no.
I got to repo it back. Okay.
Okay.
You can just go to mutable.io or Mutable on everything, more or less on social. We actually do weekly blogs based off of the industry news. So if you really want to follow the industry as a whole with edge computing, 5G networks, so on and so forth, it's a very good source of information. And then also me personally at Pele3 on Twitter or the other applications. So
great. Great to see everyone dropping their stuff here, and I'll tweet out some of these links as well. And I think, Lisa, we did it.
Yeah. So I'd like to take an opportunity to thank our extraordinary panel for leading this fantastic session. For our audience, thank you for attending. I hope you enjoyed the session. We'll be putting all this content and the recordings from the videos from all the sessions today. So if you missed any in the next week, I would say we'll have those up on our website. So please. Can
we put them on TikTok? Can we post all
absolutely.
the? Okay.
Yep, that's my that'll be fun, probably.
I hear Larry Ellison is buying TikTok, so it'll be a perfect destination for the enterprise too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So that'll be all available on demand within the next week. And thank you again, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. No, it was great. Really good meeting everyone.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.